What's up, guys? Welcome to the Friday night live stream. I'm your host, Brandon Hicks, and tonight's live stream, we're going to be continuing to work on the concept dragon in ZBrush. So it's going to be a deep dive into hopefully wrapping this up tonight. This will be the last live stream on the dragon. So definitely want to get in here and share some more with you guys on how I'm wrapping this up, what I'm doing in the process, and hope it helps a little bit if you are getting into ZBrush as well. So let me transition my screen over here a little bit and show you what I'm looking at. And let's switch this over. Okay. So you can see here, we've got the dragon loaded up and in place in ZBrush. And what I'm currently doing is kind of wrapping up all the major details so we can get in here and hopefully a little bit tonight jump into some of those fine details on the dragon, refinement, things like that. So last week we covered how to use curves and a custom insert mesh brush to create these scales in a little bit easier way on the dragon's back. And in fact, I've done a little bit of tweaking just to play around tonight. So I'm gonna go ahead and reload up a version of this dragon that was from last week. So I'm gonna clear the canvas. Let's go to load tool and pull up our concept 07. It's gonna load that up into ZBrush, drag that out, hold shift to snap it, hit T to go into edit mode. And now we are back to our original. Okay, so one of the things we didn't do last week was fix the symmetry on the horns and the scales plates on the back. So we dragged these out with a curve, but they got a little bit wobbly, a little bit off center. So what I'm gonna do tonight is start by getting those kind of fixed so that they're symmetrical. You can kind of see the center line is a little bit off. And I'm gonna play a little bit with just moving these around and shifting those so that we can kind of get those back to normal, because I want to have everything as symmetrical as possible before we get into the final step where we're going to go back and hopefully do a little bit of tweaking for the asymmetry. So we can just check to see what's going to happen first if we mirror this over. And then we can see where there might be some problem areas. We need to move things around and whatever. But I've got my move brush right now set up here. And then under geometry, if we want to mirror this over, we can get a mirror and weld. Make sure X is checked off there. And so did not do this because I have the wrong subtool selected. So I'm gonna undo that. And I can hit Alt and left click on these plates. Now we can mirror and weld. Okay, so you can see this is actually the X direction that's mirroring over to the other side because we're kind of facing a little bit of a backwards direction here. But we're losing some of the horns in the middle, my primary concern right now. So left to right, I'm not really concerned about what those are lining up on the body. I'm mostly concerned about if we're mirroring in certain sections and we're completely losing the horns, and that's because they're crossing the X axis. So I'm gonna undo that. And the only thing I really need to do is make sure that when we move, we're lining up this center line down the length of the dragon's body so that it's approximately in line. Now, if things are a little bit off, that's fine. But if we start moving a little bit with the move tool here, we can make sure our size is correct. Again, make sure we have the right part of the mesh selected. So in the subtool palette, make sure we can check this on and off. So if it's the top one in the list and we check this on and off, it's not gonna hide it because it's the one that is the topmost in the list. So, and anything that you have highlighted in terms of the selection will always be visible, even if the little eyeball is unchecked. So now that we've transitioned off of that and clicked this subtool, we can turn this on and off, and you can see this is the one that we're editing. So we need to have this selected. And now we should be able to move these around. So pick the move tool here. And as we move in and out, you can see kind of what's going on and how that's looking. So I see we got Lorian in the chat tonight. Great to see you, Lorian. Thanks for stopping by. I'm going to turn off X symmetry because that's kind of what's screwing us up right now. So I'm going to hit X on the keyboard. And now we should be able to move this freely. Okay, so I'm just lining up these center horns on these back plates so that they're kind of in a straight line, and they need to be pretty much straight down the middle. If I want a little bit of help with that, I can turn on my floor and use the grid in the background to kind of help me line things up a little bit. So zoom in here, you can kind of see what's going on like this. And I want to kind of pull this over in the best way possible. Now, the easiest thing to do if we have everything set up is to just basically pull these straight with the curve if it's still live. But in this case, we applied everything. So this is not a live curve anymore. So we're not going to be able to just drag that over. So I'm using my move tool to pull this. So from the top view, you can see here, just kind of pulling that over. Remember that everything on the right side, down the middle axis, is what's going to get copied over to this left side. So I'm really only concerned about here and over to the right in terms of how this is lining up. So once again, just get these approximately lined up down the middle. If it's crossing over too much, we're obviously going to lose those little horns, and that's not what we want. So you can use this center line for this curve that is still there that we didn't delete to tell you kind of how far over those horns need to be pushed to the right. And just tweaking them, but bunching them over a little bit is going to be enough to make sure that those still stay around when we mirror. Okay, so let's do a check again and see where we're at. So I'm going to go under geometry, hit shift and left click to open a menu and keep this other menu already open. And then under modify topology, mirror and weld. Okay, so the only thing I'm looking for now is to make sure as we look down the center, we're not missing any of those center. So they have to be perfectly identical, but I definitely don't want them to be gone, because then I'll have to resculpt those, pull those back out, and it should be a mess. Okay, so those are still there down the middle. I had to kind of look real close to tell where I was at, because there's a lot of rows of horns going on there. But I think, yeah, we still got this one. They're pointed very horizontal, facing back, so it's a little hard to tell where they are. But as long as there's a little bit of something there, I can use the snake hook brush and pull those back out. So I'm not too concerned about that. Yeah, I think that's enough to call that good. So now that they're mirrored back over and it's all showing, we can start working on the rest of our alignment here before we move on. So I'm just trying to snap this to the right perspective here. Spin this around a little bit. Let's turn our floor back off. Okay, so now that this is symmetrical, if I hit X to turn symmetry back on and I'm still moving, now we should be able to line things up properly on one side of the body, and it will be lined up exactly the same on the other side of the body. So we can subtly kind of push things in and out here if we need to get these to form a little better to the edges. And it's really just kind of up to what you want to do here. The concept art wasn't super specific about how these kind of join to the body, so I'm just kind of eyeballing some of this and playing around a little bit, keeping it fun. And if you're following along and you're not using ZBrush, feel free to follow along here. It's pretty much the same terms of the basic workflow. So this would be the grab brush in Blender. Okay, so here we've got a little bit of an issue with the wings sort of going through the horns here. So we got a couple of options. Modify the wings, which we haven't really worked a lot on yet, to kind of go under these. Or we can decide that we want the wing anatomy to stay the way that it is, and then adapt the sort of exoskeleton of these horns to go above the wings and kind of curve over those. So I'm not really sure what I want to do right now, but we're going to need to scale our brush up to kind of play and see what's going on. If you want to kind of see what this will look like without worrying about losing something, there's a couple of things you could probably do. One thing is just to duplicate the subtool and then work on a copy. So with this selected, we can just hit duplicate and then turn one of these off and just kind of tweak this one around. So if I want to move these up and above those wings like that, I can do that. So something like that, we got to add some musculature and bones and things going under the wings here, like you'd see on the back of a bird. So I'm not really sure what that would look like yet, but that's kind of what the idea would be. The other thing that we could do is obviously modify the wings. So let me show you another option for what you could do here. So I'm gonna go ahead and get rid of this tweak real fast, hit delete, hit OK. That's gonna unhide the original right there. There's also a thing called layers in ZBrush that you can use. Now I haven't played with these a lot to know if this is gonna work, but let's try it out and see what happens. So basically these are kind of like layers in Photoshop. They're gonna record changes in the topology and things like that on a subtool, and then you can blend things and all sorts of stuff like that. So I'm gonna hit this little button here to create a new layer. And then let's see if I just make a change, if it will remember that. So let's pull these up, turn that off. So it looks like if you turn this down to 0, it's gonna go back to normal. And if you turn this all the way up to 1, it's gonna remember what you did there. So there you go. So yeah, that's kind of cool because then you can turn this on and off. You can blend it with more subtle changes underneath, and there's a lot of options for how to change things. So it's saying mesh has deformation shape layers, turn off Z add, Z subtract promos, or activate layer recording mode and try again. Okay. So I wonder if I need to have that on to be able to tweak this. Pull this up kind of like that. And then when I'm done, I'm assuming you turn that off. And now we're back to normal. There we go. Kind of cool. Lauren says she likes that the scales bulge up to allow for the scapula. Yeah, it's kind of a cool thing. Not sure if we would want to kind of flatten out some of those middle parts so that they would up in that area, so they're not so bulged out. I'm not quite sure how to handle that yet, but the cool thing about this is that it's just a concept. So at this point, we're free to make as many creative tweaks just to see how many iterations we want to go through to get this looking good. So one of the last things I'll do here is I want to blend these in a little better with the neck. So I'm going to go ahead and let's turn that record button back on, and then I'm going to pull these back in to the neck a little bit so they blend in a little bit more side to side, just like that. And then later on, when we actually combine everything, we can go in and, you know, smooth that out and whatever. But I think right now that's pretty good. So let's see some of these other options down here. We've got all of the basic layer duplications that you would expect to see from something like this. And then I guess this would bake our final tweaks into our subtool. So let's try that. Bake all, go to the subtool, and yeah, I guess that's what it does. So we're good. Always fun to get in here and just kind of play around with new settings and hope for the best that nothing goes wrong. Okay, so we still have to create these other plates on the bottom of the tail here. It's going to be kind of a repeat of last week's mission to get these in place. So I can work on that if you guys want to see that. I can also work on more blending and trying to get some of these other details worked out between the details from the face down the neck to combine those in with these other horns on the back. Show you guys how to do some simple splitting, combining meshes, you know, Dynamesh options, things like that if you're interested in that. There's not a lot else you guys have not seen. The only thing we haven't really got into yet is super fine detailing. But yeah, so hope you guys have enjoyed the process. This is about the 4th live stream working on this thing, and I'm super happy to be getting closer to finishing this thing up. Underneath, there's still quite a bit of work to do here where we don't have any details yet, so that's something else we can work on. So Lauren says she would like me work on the wings. Okay, so we will work on those. Okay, so some of the things we have to start thinking about now are anatomy and how we're going to kind of tweak things from this point forward so that everything starts to line up, match up, things like that. So I'm gonna get my drawing tablet out here, pull everything into place, and let's start sculpting. Okay, so I'm gonna hit Alt and left click on the body or the wings here to get started on those. And I'm gonna take our Z-sphere version of the wings that we created for our low-res mesh. I'm just gonna get rid of this because we can always get a low-res version back if we need to. And if we want, we can go ahead and hide our plates for now so that we can work on our body. So those are actually joined together in one subtool. So if we hit Shift F to turn on polyframe and alt click on our body, you can see that the plates and the body are still kind of one mesh. So we want to separate those out so we can play with those. So I'm gonna hit Control Shift and left click on just the body because it's a separate polygroup here, and we're gonna split off the hidden section, which is all the plates, by going down to the subtool, split options, split hidden. So now all of our plates are in their own separate subtool. So we can turn that off, and now we can just play with the plates. So Alt click on the body here to get that selected. We can check that real fast, make sure we're sculpting on the right thing. Let's switch to a, let's lay a clay buildup brush. Okay, so I had a mask there, which is why I couldn't paint anything. And there we go. Now we got our sculpts going. Okay. So we got a little bit of some indication here of some anatomy for where the wings joints might be connecting to the wings and to the body and all that sort of stuff, but nothing really solidified. So let's look back at the reference just to make sure we kind of know where we're headed. Again, we know we've got some basic bat wing type construction here. So we've got some rigid, thick sort of bones coming out over the top. Those are split off into sort of finger-like joints that you would see in any sort of bird or bat configuration here. So you got a main joint, and then out of this, you can think of this as sort of the palm section. And then you've got, you know, a thumb, an index finger, middle finger, ring finger, you know, all of that coming off of those. And those each have subjoints just like your fingers do. So what we really don't see from this angle are the anatomy connections to the back, but you can imagine sort of the way that a bird would have those connections. And instead of, you know, going in and digging way into how that all works and making sure it's perfect, I'm just going to kind of wing this, no pun intended, and see what we can do here. So let's go ahead and take our body and our wings down here, and I'm going to move this up so we can click this here, and then if we click this button, it will move it up one in the list, or if we hold shift and click, it'll move it to the very top. And then our body, and hold shift click, move that to the very top. And then if we want, we can merge these together to kind of get some combination going here. So before we do that, I think I'm going to go ahead and duplicate the body and duplicate the wings here, just so that we have our originals in place. And then let's take this here and we're going to merge down. just like in Photoshop, it'll merge to the layer right underneath. So now that's all one piece. And if we turn these off, so we're just looking at this piece here, you can see this is all one connected piece. Now, we didn't Dynamesh this yet, so everything is still separate where these are intersecting. We might be able to see that if we turn on transparent. No, but they're not connected. So if we want to connect them, we're going to need to go into the geometry palette here, down into Dynamesh, and we're going to need to turn on Dynamesh for this, which will remesh this according to the setting we have here. So we can just hit Dynamesh and it'll use 128 to remesh that, which for this right now, I think that's plenty high resolution for us to work with. So let's start there. And you can see now that's all joined. So if we go in here and we hold shift and we smooth, all of that's going to be one connected piece. So that's one of the things I really love about ZBrush compared to Blender at this point, is that merging like that is not always the easiest thing to do in Blender. And here it's just it's a dream to work on really dense meshes because you can merge really, really quickly like that. Okay, I'm going to turn off these arms too because they're kind of in the way right now. So let's go back to our subtools and uncheck the arms. So those go away. Now we've got just our wings to work on by itself. So before we get started, always a good idea to save. We're going to save a new concept. It's going to automatically iterate that for us as concept 08. So I'm going to save that. And there we go. Okay, so the wings are coming in at a good place. We've already figured out the placement. That's looking good. I think I'm going to want a little bit more structure from the thicker parts coming into the side. So we've got clay buildup kind of selected here, and I'm just going to block in sort of a bigger shoulder joint that would come in and connect to the back down here. Now, again, this probably won't be accurate in terms of, you know, a perfect likeness the way a bird anatomy or a bat anatomy would come in. But at this point, I'm not really concerned about that. I can always go back in and kind of clean that up a little bit. I just want to get some of these up. And what I'm kind of thinking about right now as I go in and do this is that I don't want to get so detailed that I kind of over detail this area before I've done that to the rest of the body and the other sections, because the face got a little detailed a little too quickly because it, you know, it's always fun to work on that. But you really kind of need to work up the entire model all at the same time instead of getting super focused in on one area. Because if you make any big changes, it's always a real big pain to go back and try to undo or move big sections around and change things up if you've already detailed things out. So keep things fast, loose, big, and don't worry too much about detail at an early stage before you really need to. So we're not going to worry about surface imperfections. We're really just worried about muscle groups right now. And again, this is all kind of covered up in the end, so we don't need to worry too much, but we need to have a plan of action. So if this is going to start flapping, we're going to rig this up, and we are in the end going to export this and rig this up. We kind of need to know what this is all going to do in terms of movement. So we're going to have some bigger bulges here for the muscles. It's obviously going to be an animal that is very sort of fit and moves around a lot. So here's an interesting problem that comes up a lot when you're working on thinner meshes. And that is that if you're drawing with a big brush from one side and you've got a thin piece, sometimes it starts to pull from the other side. So if we undo a little bit, we can go back until we're kind of back to a normal place here, and you can kind of see what happens. If I pull this here, it's going to pull this up from underneath and suck that in. So it's just a paper thin mesh. So what you need to do here is there's a couple of things to get around it. The easiest thing to do is to use an inflate before you start using your big brushes. And if we hit I and then N to select inflate, we can inflate this section up. And then if we switch back to clay buildup and we start painting, it's not going to be so bad. So that's one thing you can do to kind of fix that. So let's switch back to that. Another thing you can do is you can turn off backface. I think it's under the brush settings. And I'm gonna have to look for a second to see where this is at. So let's see, under auto masking. Wow, I guessed right the first time. Okay, that's the setting. So backface mask is what you want to check off under auto masking, and that will allow you to not suck that up in, and it'll basically ignore the back faces when you're sculpting from one side. So if you have that off, it's going to do that. And if you have this on, there's obviously some settings here that you can tweak, but for the most part, it'll keep things from collapsing in on themselves. So you just need to remember that that's on because sometimes it can do some weird things if you forget that it's on and you are trying to go after a certain effect. So just make sure that you kind of know how you're using your tools there. But yeah, so we can block that in. Hint at that there. Now we've got a much stronger muscle group, bone group coming in. And obviously we're going to connect that down and that's going to come out there. But all of that is going to depend on how thick these wings are, which we haven't really talked about yet. So we're going to need to decide if we want to thin these out or kind of build these up to be super thick. A lot of dragon wings tend to be really, really thin. So I'm going to ask Lauren. Lauren, what do you think in the chats? Let me know. Do you think these should be thinner wings, sort of like leathery, translucent, or should we keep them thick and kind of muscular and have some interesting different things going on there? What makes the most sense to you? Let's hit S and draw size down, or we can do it up here. So Lorian is saying that the wing should be membranous and translucent. Okay, so that's what we'll do. So I'm gonna add some little notches in here and indicate maybe some vertebrae, something like that in the spine. And of course, we may come back in here at this section and add more horns and stuff like that. But basically, right now, we're just going to indicate some stuff happening there. Okay, so let's thin these out a little bit. You can do that a lot of ways. If you just keep smoothing, they'll get thinner and thinner. You can also switch to your inflate and then go to subtract instead of add. That'll do it as well. So let's pull our Z intensity way down. And you should be able to see this kind of slowly getting thinner and thinner. And again, less is more. You don't want to just super suck all the air out of this thing all at once. You want to dial this in a little bit. So if okay, so right around here, we're gonna want these to thin out quite a bit more. So I'm gonna pull that across. You can see what that's doing there. And up towards the top, I want to leave a thicker rim because that's where the bigger bones would be sort of branching out from. So I'm gonna hold shift and smooth this out a little bit. Let's thin that out a little more. I've still got my backface mask off, so this is allowing us to thin this out with both sides collapsing in at the same time. And if it gets too thin, you try to smooth out, or always switch back to Z add and inflate the other way. So just gingerly going in here and trying to brush this down to where we're kind of deflating these sections. Okay, smooth that out. And let's do a little bit more in here. Deflate these horns a little bit on the ends so they're a little bit sharper, a little bit more menacing. Don't want to get them too thin, but at the same time we're getting a little chunky right now, so thin these out a little bit more. And yeah, it's looking good, I think. So we could go in here and hint a little bit at the breakup for the joints, but I'm not quite sure how much of that you would need to see if there's, you know, obviously some muscle surrounding that area. So I don't necessarily want to draw like, you know, individual breakups there, but we could put a little bit of musculature in there. So let's go back to our clay buildup. And I tend to favor using the clay buildup a lot just because I think it's easy to move things around, but there's a lot of things you can use. Obviously tons of brushes here. If you want to try to use something like Damien Standard, and then this is typically used for carving in on a mesh. But if I turn this down, we can also go to Z add and it will crease up. So that's something interesting you can kind of do there. And then you can play with the focal shift, which will kind of blur out that effect. So the shallower that is, you know, the more it's going to be blurred out either direction that you go here. So the focal shift all the way up, it's going to be pretty diffused. And then with it back towards like 0, you're going to see a really sharp edge there. So I'm going to turn this up. Okay, so with your template settings to the, you know, set up to where you can use your pressure sensitivity, this would be a really cool way to come in and kind of really subtly add in some of these bone sections sort of standing up through the membrane here. And you can also add veins and, you know, all sorts of stuff like that. So this would be a good way to define those. And you can always smooth out if it's getting a little too intense, but so you can imagine coming down sort of like that. And of course, last week we also talked about how to use the Sculptress Pro. So turning this on would allow us to sculpt in more high-res detail, the shallower or the smaller our brush size. So with this sort of tool, again, it's really going to start adding those very subtle hair-thin fibers and things like that on the mesh. So if it's a little too much, which I think it is a little too small, make this a little bigger again, and then you're going to get a lot cleaner ridges there than with regular Dynamesh. Now, again, that's going to add a lot of geometry, so you want to watch that because if we turn on the polyframe, you can see how much it's thrown in there per stroke. But that is an option. And yeah, see what that's doing there. Smooth that out a little bit if it's too strong. But yeah, kind of a cool effect. And you can see getting that membrane effect, you know, on the sculpting level before you get into lighting and shading and all of that stuff is a cool way to kind of indicate what's going on there. And then you can reinforce that with subsurface scattering and stuff like that when you render. Okay, so let's play with sort of the opposite direction. I'm getting here and increase some things. So I'm gonna up a little bit. Lauren's asking, how will you convey translucency? Does that happen in Substance? So basically it's going to happen when you texture, when you are building the shader. In this, I am going to build a, this is going to be for VFX for a film. So I probably won't take this one into Substance because Substance will be more for like a low res version. And we're going to keep this one pretty high res. So what I'll end up doing is taking this into Blender and sort of painting it up there. And some of this might be done in ZBrush because it will be a little easier to work on the high res mesh here for painting. But ultimately, I'm going to get it back over to Blender and start working in cycles. And from there, I can start doing custom shaders that are getting that translucency into the wings, using subsurface scattering techniques. And it's really going to depend on the lighting and the shader setup that you create. So anyways, go back over here, give this area a little bit more attention. Hint at some things going on. And there's a lot you can do to these wings to really give them character. So if you want to create some holes in the really thin parts, say they're a little bit more battle worn, things like that, you know, all of that goes back to telling a good story with the details for your mesh, your characters, your objects, all of that stuff. So the more you can do to kind of embed a little bit of details that hint at meaning, then it really have to have an entire backstory. But you need to have, you know, a little bit of stuff in there that shows that maybe you thought this through a little bit. And the more that the viewer, the person watching this in the end sees those details, the more they're going to assume that there is a reason, there's a connection, you know, this was thought through. And because of that, they may be more willing to suspend their disbelief as you are trying to tell them a story. So the more you can get them to that level where they're going to be willing to suspend their disbelief, the better off you're going to be as someone who's trying to tell a story. Because ultimately, it isn't just going to come down to how good are the effects, you know, how many explosions are there in the movie or whatever. It's going to come down to whether or not the audience buys the story that you're trying to tell. And if you respect them by showing that you're paying a lot of attention to those details and that you took the time to think that through, and you're not putting plot holes in you know, the story, then they are much more willing to give you leeway when, you know, maybe you make a mistake or whatever. And so this dragon, if it feels real, then they're going to be a lot more likely to connect with, you know, it is a villain and be impacted by all of the things that it does, because it comes across like a real animal might, you know. We forget sometimes that, you know, we get roped into, oh, well, it's just a fantasy character, or, oh, I'm just doing this for, you know, whatever, job or whatever. But in the end, you know, people, they want to be entertained. And if you can ground this in reality by basing it on something that is something people are really scared of, or something people really think could happen based on, you know, a exotic creature in the wild, then, you know, subconsciously they're going to be much more likely to engage with the story when they're sitting at home watching it on TV or in a movie theater or playing a game or something like that. So kind of think about those things as you're working on your projects, and try to remember to give as much respect to the person who is consuming the content as you can, because they will return the favor by, you know, being willing to engage with your work a lot more, if they feel like they're being taken seriously. Or on the other hand, if they feel like you're taking them on a worthy ride, that may be another way of saying it. So what I'm doing right now is just kind of caving in these areas. If you think of a sheet being stretched over a curtain rod that's like wrapped on both sides and then pulled, then you can kind of see what I'm trying to do here is embed some folding and some stretching that's happening. And the way that you kind of do that is that you bunch up these areas that all come out from a stress point here. So pick a point that a sheet would be stretched from, sort of in the center here, and then you elongate these wrinkles away from that single point in space. So if I emanate wrinkles coming out from this one point, it's going to look like the skin is stretched further from this point. There should be more stress here. And that's how you sort of block in the wrinkles. And the rest of it, it gets more complicated. You get into physical reasons why things fold or don't fold depending on the viscosity of the material and thickness and all that sort of stuff. But basically speaking, if you're trying to draw wrinkles or sculpt them, it starts with learning where they're catching, where they're snagging on those big points on the surface, and then where are they likely to be pulling from. So any of these main bone joints on the wings, that's where we're going to have more of these intersecting, and you're going to see more wrinkles sort of pulling away from those central points. So I'm going to have areas that raise here and areas that are bumping in, and then those are going to be parallel to each other, sort of coming off of those stress points. You can see there. Do another one here. And you don't want to go too overboard. It'd be really easy at this point to get too wrinkle crazy and just go nuts. So anytime I do a lot of strokes, I try to go back in and smooth them out and dial in a little bit of variation and randomness. That way things are not perfectly situated where there's an even number of wrinkles everywhere, or it doesn't look like I just went and just threw up all over the side of a design. You want to feel like this is sort of random and organic and stuff like that, it's very hard to do, but it is possible. The more you study, the more you get in here and play. And it's actually one of my favorite parts about this process. It's just doing really, time consuming details like this, because I feel like they really sell the work. And so the more you get comfortable kind of doing this sort of stuff and can do it without going overboard, the more of a pro you sort of become with this sort of thing. So let's zoom out a little bit and see what that's looking like. So yeah, you can see that's getting a lot more leathery, sort of wrinkly in there. Got a little bit of battle scarring and stuff happening. Yeah, Lori was trying to share a link of another dragon with me. I don't know what it is. There's some sort of setting that I think is turned on that that it won't let people post links, URLs in the chat. And someone told me I could turn that off, but I'm gonna have to research that, because I don't remember checking that off when I was setting things up, and it may be a security thing. So I'm gonna look into that, because someone else was trying to share their portfolio and they couldn't post, and I think they were a little upset. So definitely want you guys to be able to share your work with me. Happy to take a look. Lauren, go ahead and post that in the guild and in the Q&A section, and I'll go ahead and take a look at it there. Lauren says, please show us what's happening on the underside of the wings. So on the underside, it was pretty much a mirror version of the upper side, but it's not mirroring up and down like it is left to right. So we're going to have back under there and do the same sort of thing. So it's there's probably some areas that still need to be thinned out a little bit, which we could do as soon as we get done with this from this side. But that's one thing we're going to take a look at. And I definitely have a place here where this needs to be sort of raised up, because this is a really thick piece right there. So the last thing I'll probably do over here is take a look at how this is connecting to the body. And we kind of smoothed this out when we joined and the Dynamesh, but you're going to want more of a fold and a lot of things happening where it connects, because obviously if the wings are flapping a lot, you're going to have there's going to be some rubbing and some things happening with the skin here. So again, stress points, right? So let's put some indications in here of things that are going on. So I'm going to put a bunch of wrinkles kind of bunched up on the side here, just to indicate things are not completely smooth and perfect over there. And anywhere these muscles and joints are coming in, you want to kind of indicate that there's some pushing and pulling going on. So the more you can get some variation in there, the more it's going to feel like, okay, there's definitely some musculature sort of things happening. So pull these across here. So you can see by resetting that focal shift, we've got a little bit of a less sharp edge there. And some good reference for this would probably just be somebody who's really, really ripped, that's flexing sort of their biceps. And you see their deltoids or their shoulder muscles, things like that. You can see when someone's flexing or lifting a heavy weight, things like that, you can see all the little sinews of the muscles that have to work together to make that happen. And so those kind of reference are what I would be looking at to make sure this is accurate. So little peaks and valleys that have contrast. So we've got a lot of smooth areas, but in the middle of those sort of peaks, you have smaller peaks that are more contrasted and tighter. And those indicate, again, smaller and smaller groups of muscles that are in there that are having to band together to pull a heavy weight. And in this case, there's quite a bit of weight going on with the wings, because even if the wings aren't heavy themselves, you've got a lot of force because of the air pressure and resistance happening when you flap. So he's got to have a lot of muscle in here to generate the movement in these wings. So, okay. So that's probably good enough for now. I might do a little bit more of this banding just to kind of show that, okay, we've got some things going on here that are creasing these under areas. And we were digging in before, and now we're raising up because we're with the Z add function here. So kind of see what that's doing on the side there. And here we go again with some of that stretching. So coming off of the wing, where that's connecting up, we would have a ridge that comes off with sub-ridges on the side that are connecting down. And you can think of more of this like loose skin that's sort of webbing and connecting to the other side there. So we could do the same sort of thing up here and have some sort of webbing effects going on. This is fun to get in here and do this. And of course, the higher resolution our Dynamesh, the easier it will be to get in here and play with wrinkles and all that fun stuff. Okay, for right now, I think that's probably good. We don't want to get too detailed. In fact, I may go in here and just kind of smooth out some of these bigger wrinkles a little bit just to knock those back. I want that to be kind of subtle. Okay. So now let's go ahead and go back into our inflate tool, and I want to knock back some of these bigger areas underneath the wing. So this is supposed to be sort of a bone structure coming off of this main joint and curving up from the side. You can see how this curves up and over like that. And what should happen is, because this is pulling up and over, underneath it should be sort of concave. And it's not really. This is ballooning up there. This should really be sort of ballooning up down here. So we need to push this up underneath to indicate that that's happening, like this. Zoom in some more. Let's go down a little bit, and then I'm really going to balloon up in here. And if we can't do it enough with the inflate tool, we can always grab the move tool and do it with the move tool. So with this selected, we just pull up our draw size. And then under here, we can pull this up just like this. And if it's getting a little too much in the top view, we can always pull that down. But the point is we need to even this out. So hit draw size down a little bit more. Under here, we'll pull these up just like that. So then we can hit shift, smooth this back out a little bit because it's getting a little too wobbly. Okay. I think that's better. So down, if we go down the side of the angle here with our view, rotate into that position where we're looking straight down the length of the wing, you can see all of the little imperfections from the shadowing. And if you smooth, you can see those go away, which is what we need to do to correct that a little bit. And let's grab our inflate again and just make sure that we are happy with the thickness everywhere else before we move on. So here, still a little thick on this underside. Let's see, maybe some here. I want to track the joints from the top view and kind of make sure I have those indicated on the bottom as well. So I'm going to grab the, let's go ahead and just grab the Damien standard brush again, and I'm going to use Z add. Come from here, and we have that going back to there. So again, I'm just kind of rotating back and forth, making sure that is indeed traveling back to the same spot. And then from here, kind of losing some of that bone. So I'm gonna add in a ridge a little bit more strong there. And we want to see that happening. So I'm putting in an indication going straight back there. And that needs to follow as closely as we can. So it actually wraps a little bit more like that. Okay. And at some point we may actually go in and add some bones that we could use a cloth sim on or something in Blender to actually get those to deform correctly instead of just putting indications in. But for now, I just want to make sure I know where those are because that's telling me where to keep those ridges and where to collapse in the bigger areas for the inflate tool. Okay, so that is good. And over here, we are good as well. So should be good to go back to inflates. Okay, starting over here, I think we're probably pretty good here. Let's go to the middle section, make sure we're good everywhere except for right about there. So I'm gonna pull this draw size down, zoom in a little bit, shift, and instead of deflating here with this, it's gonna get really thin really quick. So I may just smooth this out by holding shift and going across that edge, which will still kind of do the same thing, but it's just a little bit more easy to control that. So definitely want to smooth this out here to thin that out. And it needs to be pretty sharp and thin as we get down to these edges on the bottom side, because you can kind of picture it starting as a thick membrane at the top and then thinning out as it goes down the side over here. So if it's not thinning out enough, we can turn the Z intensity up, which will really quickly flatten that in. So you want to be careful with that. But this is a good way to get the whole area kind of blocked in quickly. Just like that. Okay, then I'll go in to this side, do the same thing. Really quickly inflate. We're actually deflating here. And if it gets gross on this edge, just remember, hold shift and just smooth it out, and it'll be fine. Lauren's asking, doesn't ZBrush have a way that you can define the bones from the top while simultaneously defining them underneath the wing? Yeah, there's lots of ways to kind of do jointing and actually rigging in ZBrush. We talked about it a little bit a couple of live streams ago when I actually rigged this thing up and deformed it a little bit. But for now, I'm not really thinking that it's super necessary to rig this up, going to all that trouble, because we're really just trying to get the surface features defined, and then we'll decide later if we need to go back in and add the joints. And the reason why I say that is because right now we know from our concept art, let me pull this back over. We know from our concept art and from reality that if we're going to be doing a bird-like or a bat-like anatomy in the way that the bones are created here, that we need to have a certain number of joints connecting those down. Now, that's the quote-unquote real way to do things. The problem is that I may or may not need that many joints when we actually go to animate this thing. And so if I go ahead and start putting all those in right now, I'm going to waste a lot of time trying to make sure that those are perfect and lined up, and we have them skinned and they work, and I can flap the wings and all that. And the truth is I may actually only need one bendy bone in Blender that connects from this point of this horn, or not a horn, but a claw or whatever this is, all the way back up to this actual joint here, because these joints in the middle may only ever kind of bend. They may not ever collapse, if that makes sense. So because they may not ever have to do this, and I'm obviously going to have to think about that before I rig this. I may not want to go to all the trouble to add in, 10 extra bones where I don't need to, because it's going to make it a lot more involved and we got to rig this up. So yeah, that's kind of my only reasoning for not worrying about rigging right now, is that I just want to make sure the skin is the way that I want it to look before we get too far into that section of the process. And I think an important distinction too to make at this point is that we are we're doing something a little different than I've done on any of my other streams, in that we're not really in production right now. So it may feel like we're in production, but we're still in the concept phase. So I've drawn up the dragon in Photoshop, I've sketched it, but we're still trying to very much work out, can this exist in a three-dimensional space and work the way that I think it's going to work on paper? Because if we can't get it to actually be positioned correctly with all the joints, we can't figure out how to make the back of the anatomy, such as what we're working on tonight with the wings, connect with the body, we can't solve those problems, then we're definitely not at a place where we need to be taking this into production and trying to build out a full model that's rigged and go to all that trouble. And so what we're trying to do here with ZBrush is solve all those problems before we say, okay, now let's take this into a production ready model where we're going to do UV mapping, we're going to do retopology, we're going to do baking, if we're going to take it into Substance and turn it into a game character, like we're going to do that. But there may be 100 more hours of work to do on a character or a creature or whatever when you get into production. Whereas in the conceptual stage, a good example would be like if an art director came in and said, you know what, those arms in the middle of the body right here, they're not working. So get rid of them. And at that point, you may have to just be like, okay. And then you're going to have to figure out a way to chop those off and then come up with a different solution. And in the conceptual phase in ZBrush right now, that's not that hard to do, right? You've already seen me tonight kind of playing with joining and splitting and combining and all that stuff. And it's not that bad. We can turn these on and off and choose whether they're connected or not. But if we've already rigged this up and we're in Blender and we're retopologizing, that's a lot of work. You saw me retopologize the pipe that we did for the course that I'm working on right now. And I spent 3 weekends just working on the retopology for that octopus thing that we did for that pipe. And this would be at least as complicated as that. So yeah, I'm trying to avoid those types of production problems before we get there. And that way there's no chance someone's going to have an excuse to come along and be like, you know what? Like, I thought that was cool, but now I'm second guessing that. And I'm like, well, That's why we have a conceptual stage. That's why right now I'm locking down all of the design issues, and everybody's going to see this posed up. We're going to rig it up in a temporary way in ZBrush. We're going to pose it. We're going to put it in Photoshop. We're going to do a quick paint over, much like we did with the 2D drawing here. We're going to do a 3D render in ZBrush, paint it up in Photoshop a little bit, make it look pretty. And then I'm going to take it back to my team and I'm going to say, all right, last chance. Do you love it the way that it is? Because if you love it the way that it is, I'll move on to doing all the other stuff to this that we got to do. But if you don't love it, now is the time to tell me, because this is the last chance you're going to have to change anything major before we're locking in those decisions. So hope that helps a little bit, kind of clear up like why I'm doing things the way that I'm doing it in this order. But yeah, that's kind of, we're getting some kind of like pipeline issues and politics a little bit, and you know, things that they're actually they're put that way for a reason in the industry, so that there's a lot of stages, a lot of people that have to okay things so that they don't end up wasting a lot of time and money and things when you get in production. Because when you get into production, you know, it costs a lot of time and money, especially in the film world, to get a high-res asset like this through the pipeline. Where it looks photorealistic, because it may have to go through several departments and several hundred artists may touch this before it's all said and done. And you don't want to be the guy that says at the very end of that process, nah, you know what, chop the wings off. I don't like those. You're going to have a mutiny on your hands. So, okay, let's take a look. We got the top of this looking decent for the wings. Not quite as detailed everywhere. But you gotta remember the center of this is gonna be covered up by those plates. So we wanna not get too crazy with all the stuff going on there, because those are covering that up. And then we might do a little bit more work in here, but let's make sure the underside is kind of where we want it to be before we move on to unifying everything back up. So at this point, I'm gonna kind of inflate a little bit more on these undersides where the bones would be, and rather than using inflate, let's just go back to Damien standard, because it would be a little bit easier to just carve in those ridges. So I'm gonna pull my draw size up a little bit, and there we go. So rather than doing additive operation, I'm doing a subtractive operation on both sides of where the bone would be, and that's allowing me to kind of indicate a ridge that's there. So accomplishing sort of the same thing that I would if I went the other way, but we're still trying to thin these wings out, so this is what I would do instead. Smoothing that back out a little bit. Okay. So again, think about where the muscles are, think about where cartilage would be, think about, yeah, anything that you would need to have underneath this membrane that would kind of make sense to have in there as a character. So again, we got a big thick section here where this bone's coming up underneath, but we also need to make sure that that's, you know, tapered off right here underneath, because it's, again, we got skin and stuff hanging off. And if again, you want to go back in with those sort of wrinkle stretches of skin that are coming off of a stress point, just switch this to Z-add and make sure your focal shift is where you want it, and then you can put in some more stretchy, wrinkly sections like that. But it's really kind of up to you. So, and this is actually be a really good time to use your layering that we talked about earlier on, because if you wanted to just do an entire layer of wrinkles and custom definition for veins and stuff like that, you could do that on a layer and then turn that on and off, and that would be a great example of where you would bring in like your art director and say, all right, do you like this? Here's the way it looks with it on, here's the way it looks with it off, and that way, before you spend another 8 hours making sure all of these little details are perfect with alphas and, you know, custom texture painting and stuff like that, he can be like, yeah, I think that's good, or no, don't waste any more time on that. You know, let's focus on the tail at this point. So hope that helps. Always try to leave you guys with a little bit of real world examples of situations that have happened to me. It's not always easy to think in terms of time is money, but you know, the more you actually work on real world projects for clients, the more you have to start making those tough decisions about, you know, I'd love to make this really, really pop and be perfect and all this stuff. And the problem is, you know, a lot of clients, they don't have the budget for it. And so you can't always do those amazing changes you would want to do because there's not time. And if you're not getting paid for it, it's business. You know, you can't just sit here and give somebody $10,000 of extra work because you're not gonna be in business. Okay, so I think we need to go back and inflate a little bit more. Let's add back some of these edges here. It's getting a little too thin on us. I'm not doing a lot, I'm just doing a little bit because these are getting super thin. You can see where it gets too thin. We got a little bit of an issue with this collapsing on itself. So to fix that, just hold shift and smooth. And usually you'll be good. But if it's so thin from the side view, it's kind of disappearing. Like that's probably too thin. You need to, you know, consider that and don't go so nuts with your deflate operations that you're making that happen. You can see again, this way too thin is going to have a lot of repercussions you gotta watch out for. So don't want to do that if you don't have to. And at some point, you may need to go in and just re-Dynamesh because that can fix a lot of those weird problems that's going on. So because we've been using this on and off, Dynamesh was turned off. So at this point, if we re-Dynamesh, we probably want to turn this up a little bit. So we might want to turn that up to like 256 and then turn Dynamesh on. And if you do that and you find you're having things like this happen, that's because you've got two parts of the mesh collapsed on itself and you've made it too thin. So this is an example of where we've inflated too far and now there's holes going all the way through the other side of the mesh. So before we do that, let's go back to our inflate and make sure that we thicken this back up a little bit. I'll do it from that side and I'll do it from this side as well. Okay, and then we can just double check, make sure when we re-Dynamesh that that's not happening again. And you want to look everywhere else to make sure both sides that nothing weird is happening. And then if you're good, then you just move on. Okay. If you ever get way off to the side and you don't know where you're at, if you just hit F on the keyboard, that'll reframe your entire object, your current tool. It's handy, a little short to remember. Okay, so most of that's looking pretty good. And any areas that are looking a little blocky, since we up-res to 256 resolution, we can go in and smooth it. But I think for the most part, we're looking pretty good there. I'm going to thin some of this down by making it look thinner with some more of those sort of straggly lines and stuff like that. So let's switch back to our Damien standard on subtract. I'm just lightly brushing some of these in here like this. Going back and smoothing, and I'm just doing that over and over and over again. This is where you get into trying to do random stuff, and it's always hard not to do stuff in a very patterned, predictable way. The best advice I can give you is just don't think when you get in here at this stage and try to do things a certain way, because the more you try to make it random, the more unrandom it kind of feels sometimes. So what you want to do is you want to start brushing using a particular technique. Sometimes you want to go straight lines, sometimes you want to go curved lines, and then to the best of your ability, just change your technique and move around instead of staying in one area and then repeating the same stroke. Because you got to remember, you're not cross-hatching. You know, you're not trying to make perfect lines. You're trying to make it seem like nature was involved and random. And to do that, you have to be as loose and as fluid as you possibly can and draw from things that kind of make more sense. And the best way too to make it feel like it's working is use those physical things that you know about, such as, you know, stretching from a stress point for the wings and the thinner parts to make them look like a piece of fabric that's draped over something. And the more you kind of know and understand those little rules for how things would actually work based on physics, the easier it will be to, you know, echo that stuff into tree leaves or, you know, scales on a snake or whatever random thing you're trying to make look random. And you'll find that a lot of things in nature maybe aren't necessarily random. Sometimes a lot of them have very specific patterns. And the trick there is, you know, a lot of study, a lot of patience, and trying to figure out what patterns are actually popping in and emerging at that point. There's a lot of flowers and you know, things that you would see in you know, textures and things in nature are going to have patterns. You may not feel like patterns, but the more research you do, the more you start realizing, like, oh, okay, the way the butterfly colors are created is there's some method to that madness, and maybe I need to try to figure out what some of that is so that people immediately connect with that subconsciously and go, okay, that feels real. I don't know why it feels real, but it feels real. And a lot of that's just because, you know, people watch stuff their entire lives, and some of them might even think they know why something looks a certain way, but a lot of people don't. And it's just your job as an artist to come in and pick apart those little minutia and those details and figure out, all right, well, how does the world work? What makes this tick? And can I uncover that secret? Because if I can, then there's a good chance that I can do something photorealistically, or I can make this person move in this way to make it feel like, oh yeah, this character is dancing and it feels like he's dancing, or there's real emotion in this person's eyes and I can't tell why, but it just feels like there's emotion. And a lot of that has to do with just little subtle ticks that you pick up because you've taken the time to study and you just know. Good example is a buddy of mine was kind of explaining some things for public speaking and how to talk on camera and things like that. And he was like, people know when you're not really smiling. You know, they know when you're in here and you're pretending and you're doing a fake smile, and the way they know that is because your eyes don't move. When you try to smile and you're not really into it, your eyes don't squint. You know, the bottom of the lids, they stay where they're at. If you really want to show like you're into something or you're actually smiling, you know, when you're doing a presentation, you need to actually involve your eyes, because the more you get into that, the more it actually involves your entire facial muscles and all of that. And it sends an actual signal to the person looking at you, like, oh, okay, they're genuine about this. And so that one little muscle tick is what tells people when you're doing a speech or whatever that you mean what you're saying. And that's pretty important to know, because I know when I've done public speaking, I really want people to know that I'm there and I'm spending my time doing that because I care about what I'm saying, and I don't want them to think that I'm arrogant or I'm just here for myself. Like, you know, I want them to know that my body language is telling them, okay, I take this seriously, and you know, I'm here for a reason, and it's because I think I have something to share that you care about, maybe. So, anyways, we're getting into some body changes at this point. Anyways, so yeah, for the wings, I think for the first round of details, it's probably okay. If we pull back and we notice there's a lot of things we need to go back and fix, we can do that now, but the best thing to do would be just move on and then get the rest of the surrounding areas worked up to the same level. Just make a mental note that, all right, this looks off. I think it's because of this, but for right now, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go back and give my brain some time to think about what I've been doing. I'm gonna work on something else, and then maybe tomorrow I'll come back and I'll take a second pass at these wings and go, all right, well, why is this looking weird? And you know, tomorrow you're gonna see stuff you don't see today because you've already spent, you know, an hour working on these little wrinkles and details, and you get to a point where you just get used to wrinkling things up and you stop thinking critically about why, and that's bad. So you need to give your brain some time to adjust and then go back and fix things. Lorian is asking, are you using a keyboard shortcut to switch between Damien Standard and ZBrush? So I had set up a custom menu, but for whatever reason, I forgot to save it and it's gone. So last stream, I was kind of working on that. But so to switch between brushes in ZBrush, no, I don't have any keyboard shortcuts set up right now. And the easiest thing to do to switch between these is to remember that basically every brush can be activated by hitting B on the keyboard to bring up the brush menu, and B as in boy. And then each of these are alphabetically sorted by the name. So if you can remember the name of the brush, or at least what it starts with, then you can filter. So basically, if I hit B and I go, okay, well, I'm looking for Damien Standard, I don't want to have to dig through this whole menu, but I know it starts with Damien. Okay, so I hit D, D as in dog, and there you go. There's only 4 brushes that start with the letter D on the keyboard, and here they are. And after that, it's basically an abbreviation, and that's the way they try to set this up for these brushes. So typically, it's an abbreviation. If it's a 2-word brush like Damien Standard, it would be DS. So BDS is Damien Standard. Sometimes for like move, it's 1 word, so they use 2 letters that are kind of prominent in the word. So for move, it's BMV for move. And it's pretty logical. So you start to pick up how this works. Inflate, it's BIN. For smooth, it would be BSM. And smooth is a little different because it only works when you're holding shift. So it'll tell you, hey, this only works when you're holding shift. So make sure you have the shift key pressed to use it and say, okay. But yeah, that's how you switch. And you know, I'll probably go in and set up custom keyboard shortcuts because I think that'll actually speed things up quite a bit, but it's actually not that hard using the default settings to switch around. So clay buildup, for example, I think it's BCB. So I go, all right, well, it's probably BCB. So I go BCB. And yep, there you go, clay buildup. Clay would be BCL, BCL. Yep, there you go. You know, so just learn some of the names of these, and then, you know, worst case scenario, you can go in here, hit B, and after you're in here, look for the alphabetical category you're looking for. So if I want snake hook, I go, okay, S. Hit S, and then, all right, here's all my S brushes. And snake hook's right down here. So SH, snake hook. And there you go. Now you got snake hook. So BDS. So it actually is a lot faster to create custom keyboard shortcuts. I'm hitting 3 keys, but, you know. The other thing is I'm left-handed, so it's kind of funny getting in here and sculpting because I feel like a lot of this is set up for right-handed people, and it's hard for me to currently, with the default settings, switch between stuff. So I actually set up some custom keyboard shortcuts for move, scale, and rotate. So those are 1, 2, 3 now on my numpad. Because I can use my right hand now and switch between these quickly. And yeah, so that's one example of something that I've kind of switched around that makes it a little easier and faster. All right, so we did the underside pretty well. I think that's enough. And I'm going to do a little bit more work on the top side wings, and then we're going to go on. Because we're already at 8:30. And I want to see what else I can do on the underside of the stomach tonight. Okay. So pull this in a little bit more. And, you know, I've had a little bit of experience doing stuff like this, so I kind of know what I'm looking for, but you know, I'm not overthinking this. There's not a lot of critical double checking anatomy on Pinterest, you know, making sure this is all perfect. Like I said, it's just me exploring shapes. If I don't like it, I can always smooth it back out, you know, if I hate it. So it's just a lot of push and pull, and it's great to do this in ZBrush or any kind of digital sculpting program where you're free to make tons of calculated risk decisions, where you're not going to rope yourself into some terrible decision that is impossible to fix in clay. Because if you were doing this traditional sculpting, yeah, there could be a lot of downsides to making bold decisions that would take you forever to correct if you made a mistake. So I like doing it this way because there's a lot of freedom and happy accidents. Lauren's asking, will you put in the tears and scars and the wings in ZBrush or later in Blender? Yeah, I'll definitely do it here. And then what we'll really have to decide is, does that need to be, when we go to retopologize this for the production side of this mesh, we're going to need to actually put those holes in, or can we just use a transparent shader to create the holes with a texture map? Because if we could do that, then we're going to avoid extra geometry and you know a lot of extra modeling and potential correction and tweaking we would have to do for the topology when we retopologize. So that's a good exercise in trying to figure out what is most efficient, and it's all going to be based on how big are the holes, you know, how many of them are there. Again, are we going game res with this mesh, or are we going to go final film with the model? And if we're going to go film, then we have more polys to play with, right? So there's a good chance I can get away with actually carving in these holes and putting those in a final retopoed mesh. But if we're going to go game res with this dragon, then there's a good chance I'm going to try to get away with that using some sort of a transparent shader, because carving holes that aren't, you know, as big as the inside of this wing right here, it's kind of a waste of geometry. And if we're going to go to Unreal Tournament or Unity or whatever, it's a lot of polygons are given up just for holes in the wings. And here's another good point too. You know, if the wings, even for a film, are going to be moving all the time and they're going to be motion blurred, you might as well do it in a texture, because motion blur is going to kick out a lot of those fine up close details. So unless you're going to have a close up, you know, shot of the wings, where you need to actually have holes in those, I would try it as a texture first. You know, I would do a short test. I'd export things. I would try it with a simple wing and just see, all right, well, in some of these test shots of the film, is this going to be doable? Because if it is, then I'm not going to waste my time making sure these are modeled in there perfectly. Now, you know, as long as we're still high res and in ZBrush, putting holes in these wings is fast. It's easy. It's not hard, but it really gets down to where you're trying to go back into production with this, and you're saying, you know, you gotta start worrying about polygons and memory in your computer and all that kind of stuff. So Lorian's asking, what does games mean? So there's a big difference between projects, how many polygons you can have. So if I close this palette, you can see we're already using 3.4 million polys for this dragon. And I'm not even sure, that may just be for the current subtool. So if I were to turn on, I'm not sure if this will change anything, but let's see what happens. If we turn on all of our subtools here, And then I were to alt click on these, yeah, that's not changing the bottom number. So yeah, the total number of polys we're working with, everything showing is 3.4 million. That's huge. Just give you an example. I'll pull up a scene that I'm working on for that other course right now. Give me 1 second to pull this up, guys. Okay. So I'm currently in production on this course for Blender right now, and we're working on a 3D illustration. So this was last night's render. Pull this over. Okay. So this scene right here with all of these objects, and here's the pipe that you saw me sculpting. At one point, this pipe was like 25 million polys, and then we had to, we had to res that down because that's way too many polys. This entire scene at this point is less than 1 million polys, or maybe a little over. But that's a good example of why you need to start managing that. So here's the difference. This is a 3D illustration. It could very easily be sort of put in the same category as what you might use for a visual effects shot in a film. So we're able to get away with a little bit more polygons. But even for this, we'd want to optimize this as much as possible, because the more polygons you have, the longer it takes to render a shot. So right now, this thing is not very optimized. With the settings I had last night, it was taking like 2 hours to render this shot. Now this is pretty high res. It's more than HD, but still, that's a long time to render 1 frame. So put that in perspective with a visual effects shot, which for film, there's 24 frames a second. That means the dragon has to be rendered out 24 times for every second that it's on the screen, moving around. So we got to figure out a way to speed that up, because if it takes an hour per frame, that's not really manageable. That's impossible to put that into a project, especially if we're an indie developer, we're indie artists working on our own computer at home, and we have to do that. So it gets even worse when you go to games, because games have to update sometimes 120 times a second on the screen. And so that's not just a character, that's the entire level. So you can imagine this entire scene, if you're running around playing a game like Call of Duty or whatever, with a whole army on the screen and tanks and, the forest and whatever else is going on, all of that geometry has to be rendered 120 frames per second, on a really good computer or console or whatever. And so game res is basically saying every single object in the game has to be as low resolution as possible while still being able to make it look good, so that we can make it look presentable and playable. Because if you make everything super high res, it may look really great. And this goes for VR as well as games, because it's kind of the same thing. If you make everything high res, it can't update. The engine's not fast enough. It'll slow everything down. You've seen slow internet where you have lag, or you've seen Netflix not being able to catch up and stream because there's not enough speed on your internet. Same thing with this problem. There's a bottleneck. And so the resolution for your objects, no matter what pipeline you're talking about, whether it's games or film or stills even, you got to constantly be aware that everything takes up memory, everything takes up render time, and your computer can only process so much before it starts to slow down. So what I'm concerned about in this scene is I'm concerned about poly count. How many polys in the millions do we have in this entire scene that we're working on? For each object, I've got to track that. I've got to kind of know where I can budget those polygons and make sure that I'm not over budget, because if I know that anything over about 1 million polygons, my computer is going to slow down and it's going to take me twice as long to render the scene. Now that's, it's not a great example, but let's just say that we knew that. Then I obviously want to keep my scene below that poly count. And it's the same problem with textures. So here's another good example. It would be really tempting to go in and just go, oh, hey, let's just use 4K textures for every object in the scene, because it's going to look really amazing. I want to have really high def, writing and all this stuff. I want amazing textures. Well, I've got 2 pretty decent graphics cards. I've got 2 8GB, AMD cards, but I will eventually run out of memory. right? And when I run out of memory with cycles in Blender, it'll basically just stop working. It'll tell me there's an error, you're out of memory, and then it'll stop rendering. That doesn't matter whether you have an NVIDIA card, AMD, whatever, but it's the same problem. So I have to not only budget my poly count, I have to budget my textures, because every texture that you have per object takes up a certain amount of memory. And at some point, if you have too many textures in the scene, you're gonna run out of memory. So there's another example of where you would wanna make sure you're kind of paying attention to that stuff. So all that said, we're in ZBrush tonight. We've got 3.4 million polygons on the dragon, and that's fine because right now we're not worried about poly count, we're worried about design. Once we get the design locked in and it's finished, then we can go, all right, how are we gonna get that poly count down? And there's a whole lot of really good ways to do that in ZBrush and in Blender too. But all of that is another workflow, it's another part of the process, and it's part of production. So what's great about the concepting stage, which is what we're doing tonight, is that we're not so focused on making sure that our poly counts are perfect. Now, if you get too heavy, even in ZBrush, on the concepting stage, this can slow your computer down. So I've had scenes get up to 20, 30 million polys because I just wasn't paying attention. Or if you get into the super high res detailing stage on skin and stuff like that, this can quickly start creeping up there. And you just gotta pay attention to that stuff, because you'll hit a point where ZBrush will just say, nope, can't handle it, and it'll just crash. So you wanna make sure you're kind of paying attention to that stuff. So there we go, let's turn that off. So we don't need that in place anymore. These are our backup set of wings. And let's take a look now. So you'll also notice like it goes down a little bit even, because there's a lot of points in the scene. If you hit Shift F to switch into your poly frame, depending on what subtool you have up, you can see all the polygons that is involved. And if you zoom in, you can see every square is a polygon. And so if I alt click on the wings, every square is a polygon. Every square or triangle is a polygon. And you can see pretty quickly why we're at 3.5 million polys. There's just a lot going on here. And face is the same way. So if we all click on the face, zoom in, every square is a poly. So yeah, you want to keep that in mind. Okay, so let's make sure we're happy with our wings. And then before I sign off tonight, I'm gonna get in a little bit more on the underside of the dragon, and we're gonna work on how these arms match up and some of the anatomy there. Okay, so quick tip, if you're worried about things slowing down because you have too many polys going on, turn off some of your subtools so that you're not showing everything all at the same time. So let's turn off our plating right here. And that speeds things up a little bit more. And we can turn off our head as well, because we still have that separated. So that is now gone. We don't need to show our eyes right now, or the horns on the head, any of that stuff. So we can just switch back to this and our arms. So Lauren is asking, does ZBrush have a decimate function? Yes, and that is exactly what you would use to kind of start lowering this poly count depending on what you're trying to do with it. So there's a lot of ways to kind of re-optimize your mesh if you want to lower the resolution. Real quickly, I can kind of go over that if you're interested. Decimate is one of those things I would use if I'm going to go like 3D print something. That's a good example of when decimate would work, because you're not really worried about the topology anymore. You're just worried about lowering the poly count. So if you're uploading something to 3D print, like to Shapeways, for example, they've got a maximum poly count or a maximum file size that you can work with, and you got to keep it under that design spec, obviously. So whatever that is, you got to make sure you decimate down to that level. So let's duplicate this subtool so we can work on a new version. And I'm going to turn off everything so that we're just working on, this top copy that we just copied. And let's talk about decimating. So again, Shift F will show you all the polys that we currently have on this mesh, and it's quite a lot. So You got the whole body basically in here minus the head. And there you go. So we want to decimate this down. So I'm going to collapse the menus over here. Let's go into geometry. And if we look at some of these, we've got options down here. We got ZRemesher. And this is one of the options you might want to use if you want cleaner topology. So we're going to talk about that. But first, let's talk about decimation. So under Z plugin, there is a plugin called Decimation Master right here. So I'm going to drag the Z plugin options over to the left side of our menu here so we can keep that open. And under Decimation Master, the way this basically works is you're going to load the entire mesh into memory, and you're going to do that by pre-processing the current subtool that you have selected. Or if you want to pre-process all of your subtools, you would hit pre-process all. And this will let you preview what the decimation is going to do on the fly based on these settings down here. So we're going to wait till this is done processing. It's loading all of our geometry into memory so it can quickly decimate on the fly. And then once that's done, we should be able to quickly preview what this is going to do for us. So now that that's loaded into memory, we can go ahead and set this up. So currently we still have a 4.7 million poly count over here. So I'm going to collapse this so you can see what this is at. 4.775, so almost 5 million polys. And let's say what these are down here. So 20% is basically going to take a percentage of what you currently have and try to get as close as it can to 20% of the total number of polys. You can actually set a number of polys that you would like to use if you want to dial in a specific number, or you can do this by points. And then again, you can decimate the current subtool, or you can decimate all your subtools based on these settings. You've also got presets down here. If you want to hit 250,000 polys, instead of having to go through pre-processing and doing all of that at once, you can just hit these buttons and it'll do it for you. So let's say I want to 3D print this, right? But it's got to be under 1 million polys. So I'm going to aim for like 500,000. So let's type in 500,000 right here. And then I'm going to say decimate current. And then it's going to quickly try to go through and decimate that for me. So it's now calculating that. And yeah, so there it went and changed the active points down to 250,000. So the total points is still reading off based on all the subtools, I believe. So if we really wanted to see this work on the total polys as well, we would have to separate this off into a totally separate mesh. So let's go ahead and take this, and I'm going to switch into a cylinder 3D here, and let's append our concept here. Okay, I'm going to get rid of this mesh here because we don't need that. And now we've just got all of our subtools are gone because we're in a new object here. And now you can see again, we're down to 250,000 points. So if we hit Shift F now, you can see it's decimated and it's cleaned up a lot in terms of the number of polys, but it's, it's ugly topology. So there's not even quads. And again, when you're 3D printing something like that, that's not important. So you don't really care about that stuff. You just care about lowering resolution. And you can take this all the way down to, let's say 20,000. Excuse me. So hit 20,000 and there you go. So it's going to try to keep all of your, excuse me. It's going to try to keep all of your details in the same place, but obviously the lower resolution you go, the more detail loss you're going to have. So it's kind of just a game of, playing with how low can I go before this gets ugly. Now 20,000 might be okay for a cutscene in a game. If this is going to be a really close-up model, you need to do an animation with a hero character or whatever, 20,000 might be an okay number. More often than not, if you're going to have somebody for a character in a game that's going to be close up and it's going to be in battle or something running around, 5,000 polys maybe would be more an accurate target depending on, again, what you're doing. So if it's going to be a character that's moving around a lot, there's going to be a lot of motion blur, a lot of action. They're not tons of close-up details. you're going to go lower. You're going to go 2 to 5,000. You get into cutscenes. Again, there's a lot more play there because you can optimize the scene based on what you're showing on camera. So you know in a cutscene, the character can't run around and explore the entire world. So because of that, you can load in higher res characters, higher res vehicles, you know, all that kind of stuff. And that's the game that you play. So this is Decimation. So now let's talk about ZRemesher. So I'm gonna go back to my concept here with all of our subtools. And if we get rid of our duplicate there, we can see we're back to our original. So if I zoom in, hit Shift F, we get all of our points back. Okay, if I collapse that, you can see we're back at 3.4 million polys. Okay, so Lorian's asking, do you specify the number of polys for each frame? No, so it's like it's baked into the mesh. So when we talked about budgeting for a scene, like the scene that I'm rendering right now for that other course. And I said there's like 1 million polys, and I know if it goes over a certain number, we're in trouble. Same thing for a game. The people that are developing a certain game, they know because they've developed games enough with experience to know, all right, if we're working on the next Battlefield or the next Call of Duty or whatever, we can only have so many number of polygons in a scene, in a world, before the PlayStation 4 won't work anymore. It'll start slowing down, right? So what has to happen is every department has to have a poly budget. They have to know what targets they're hitting, or each individual character artist or whatever, they have to know, all right, you got to keep your character under this number of polys. If they're in production, you know, now concept artists don't care as much. They're just about the presentation, right? So what we're doing tonight, again, we don't really care. But when we get into actual production, when I go to create, animate this, rig it for the actual film where we're doing the visual effects, I do care about polys at that point, because we're going to have to render this, and every frame that we render is going to take a certain amount of time, and that adds up. Because let's say we've got 24 frames a second, it's on screen every shot an average of 5 seconds, and we have, you know, let's just say we've got some numbers we want to crunch here. So we've got 24 frames a second, and it's on camera for every shot about 5 seconds. So we'll multiply that times 5, and then there's 30 shots, which for a short trailer, short film, not a trailer, but a short film, that's, you know, whatever. So 30 shots. So that's 3,600 frames. Now, if each frame takes 5 minutes to render, that's 18,000 minutes. Divided by 60, it's 300 hours. Divided by 24, that means our computer, if we're going to render it in-house on one computer, it's going to take 12.5 days straight, 24 hours a day, to render 30 shots with this dragon. And that's if it's 5 minutes a frame. Now that may be unrealistic considering a couple of reasons. One, I'm not going to spend 5 minutes per frame, right? That's a little long depending on how far away the dragon is. It's going to vary a little bit, first of all. Second of all, I'm probably going to do this on a render farm. I'm probably not going to do this in-house on my personal computer, because I'm not going to tie my computer up for 12.5 days, right? So yeah, so those are some considerations to think about, but yeah. So yeah, long story short, no, it's not number of polys for each frame. It's you finalize the version of the model for the shot that you're working on, and then basically you keep that version of the model around for every type of shot that matches that. So you might have a couple of different versions of the dragon that are different resolutions based on how far away it is from the camera. That might make sense. But for the most part, you get one finalized version, and that's kind of the one you stick with. Okay, so let's talk about remeshing. So again, right now, everything's really, really dense. We want to get this down to a low resolution version, but we don't want to use decimate because that's just going to turn everything into ugly triangles. It's not symmetrical, you know, weird things happening. So we want to use remesher, which is going to be ZBrush's automatic way of trying to give us good workable topology for animation. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to go down to geometry, and then we're going to look for ZRemesher, and then we've got a lot of options here for the way that we can work this. Some of these are kind of the same as some of the options you would have over here, So these will kind of indicate how many polys you're going to get when you try to ZBrush. So you can say half, you get half the number of polys. You can use ZBrush just to reconfigure the layout of the topology. And if you do that and you just want to have the same number of polys, you can check same. You can say, well, I don't mind if you double them to give me better topology. That's fine. Anyways, there's a lot of things you can do, including poly paint here, which will let you tell ZBrush with some guides when you paint on the mesh, where you want your edge loops and things like that to show up when you ZBrush. But I'm not going to worry about any of that. I'm just going to show you kind of what it does. So if we hit ZBrush with our polyframe turned on, let's see what that does. So I don't know how long this will take considering how dense this mesh is, but let's just let this process appear. And it's trying to simplify everything down into simple workable topology. Now, the great thing about ZBrush is that the topology that it gives you, although probably not perfect, is a really, really easy, fast way to get good, clean, semi-animatable topology. So the edge loops that it put in for me around the wings and stuff took into account the way that they would probably need to be modeled so that I could animate this without weird things happening. And I don't really have time to get into, you know, how topology flows need to work for animation when you have muscle groups involved and things for characters. But there's a certain way that the topology needs to be laid out for characters so that when you are flapping these wings, they actually bend and fold in the right areas. And if you have polygons running all sorts of ways that's not in an organized way over the wings, when they fold or you try to make them fold with animation, a lot of times they're going to deform in really, really weird, funky sort of ways. So the way that this rebuilt these wings is so that I have seams like in all the right places, wherever these wings are going to flap and fold on the sides. Those are now, you know, perfectly got edge loops running around the inside edges there, so that's good. All of the horns are nicely wrapped with edge loops going around the right direction. You know, and it tried to make my life easier by giving me a low or a semi-low resolution mesh to work with that is perfectly suitable for animation. And of course, we're going to use this to bake higher res detail into with a normal map, and you know, we'll texture it up to match the high res version, but this is what you would want to animate with. And so all of that was done without any worrying about any of the settings here. I just hit ZBrush and bam, I've got something that I could probably take in a Blender right now, rig it up, and it would work fine, maybe even with automatic weights. So Lauren's saying, Brandon, I think that those wings need to be either longer or wider in order to support the weight of that dragon. Don't they look a bit small to you? So I'm not sure. I haven't really zoomed out lately and kind of looked yet, but you could be right. Yeah. They could need to be longer. The hard part about kind of getting things in place, which is a good example of kind of why we're doing this tonight, is that from here, you get a certain angle, a certain point of view. The body's very coiled up in the perspective that we're in, and it looks good from this angle, right? But now that we've stretched the dragon out, all of the limbs are out, his tail's all the way elongated out to the side. You're thinking, okay, well, yeah, now that this is all stretched out and he's trying to fly through the air, yeah, maybe those wings are a little small, you know? And so that's a perfect example. Couldn't have planned that better for a good reason why we're going in and doing concept art at this stage, because somebody could have come alongside like you just did and said, you know, now that we look at it, those wings are probably small, because with the tail is that long and there's more weight back here, he probably couldn't get off the ground. And so, yeah, that's a good example of like what we need to do to fix that. So if we wanted to do that quickly, and then I'm probably going to need to wrap this up and leave. But I'm going to go ahead and let's just undo. So we go back to where we were. Shift F. Okay, now we're pretty high res. And again, why I love ZBrush for this sort of thing, because it makes it easy to, you know, figure things like this out. So there's a lot of things we could do here. If we wanted to, we could snip the wings off so that we could just work on those by themselves, and then later we could go back in and reattach them, or we could just mask and try to manipulate things by themselves. Lauren says your concept drawing has another section to the wings. Interesting. Let's take a look. at that. 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, it does. That's interesting. Yeah. So, okay, here's a good way to kind of take a look at that and add that back in. So we like these areas over here. Let's say we want to add that back in on this side. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to take this. We've still got X symmetry turned on. And I'm going to go ahead and kind of mask this out. And the way I'm going to do that is if I hold Control and draw a mask like this on the side, it's going to create a mask on those wings. And it's actually masking off the wings so that we just have access to the center of the body. So we want to invert this. So I'm going to hold Control and left click out in the canvas over here to just select the wings. So we're going to leave the body the way that it is. And let's try with a deformation to see if we can get this to kind of stretch out. If that doesn't work, I'm going to use the transpose, but let's start with this and see if this works. So we can use size, see if that will do it in the X direction. And yeah, that'll do it. So, so if we're okay with it being able to stretch and kind of elongate the wings like that, we can do it that way. And just pull those out like that. That's one way to do it. So if we hit Control Z to undo that, here's another way you can do it. If we hit B and then T and then R for transpose, we've got our little transpose tool. Now, the way this basically works is if we hold Alt, we can reposition this anywhere we want by just clicking and dragging. And you click to put it somewhere on your mesh, and then you drag while you're holding Alt to kind of point it in the direction you want it to be facing. So now when I let go of Alt, I can rotate around and it will be stuck to my mesh like that. So now what I can do is I can move stuff with the move here. And of course, it's paying attention to my masking. And based on where I put this on the mesh, it's using that as the pivot point. So if I wanted to rotate, I could rotate around that point. And of course, we can scale. So if I wanted to scale, I could basically do the same thing here that I just did down here. And that's how we can add those in. So that's what we need to do there. Pull this out to the side. And, you know, if you're looking at this from the way that a human being would be lined up, basically the length of your arm span from side to side. Sorry, excuse me. My throat's getting dry. Would be the length of your body from top to bottom. So that's a good rule of thumb to follow if you want to try to nail this in terms of accuracy for what you'd see in nature. That's definitely the way I would do it. So yeah, that's probably what I would tweak. And what I'll probably do, since Lauren pointed that out now, is I would probably go back and add in that other section because it needs to go somewhere right around there. And if we're done masking and scaling that out, we can hold Control and drag and just get rid of that. And of course, we need to go in and kind of smooth this out and make sure that's all back to normal. That's a really quick way to kind of tweak that and make that modification so that we're back to normal there. Okay. So one of the things we need to do, I don't work on the wing anymore tonight, but one of the things we want to do is with the arms, let's make sure we have everything turned back on. Okay. So these arms are kind of supposed to be insect-like in the way that they work, but right now they're just kind of stuck on the side. So I want to reinforce the way that these connect to the body with some sort of anatomical structuring. So I'm going to work just a real quick, you know, construction in here to kind of show you what I would do to solve this sort of issue. Lauren says she wants to see deeper webbing where the wing connects to the body. Yeah, I think that'd be cool. Definitely think that would be fun. Maybe in here we could do like duck webbing coming out from the body, something like that. That'd be fun. Definitely work on that and do an update at some point. So really interesting questions about how these arms work And Lauren will remember going all the way back several weeks or maybe months at this point, talking about how these would crisscross and fold in on each other and things like that. So what we kind of talked about at the studio was creating some interesting concave, weird, translucent type of indentations for the stomach down here, and doing that in such a way that there's a place for these arms to kind of fold in on the sides. So what I'm doing right now is just kind of going in, giving myself some cavities in here to kind of block in some of these areas. And again, I have no plan on what I'm going to do to make this work, but I'm just trying to get this blocked in. Now, this is probably a little too high res right now for doing what we're doing. If I was going to take my time and do this, I would probably re-dynamesh this at a lower resolution, or turn on my this button, Sculptors Pro, to do some dynamic sculpting. But since we're trying to do this quickly tonight, I'm not gonna worry about that right now. So I'm just trying to hollow out an area in the middle here that's kind of consistent. And then what I want to do on these top edges on the sides is go in and kind of give myself a little bit of a raised area. And anytime you have joints or things that connect to the body, doing this can kind of ground them in, you know, the form to make it feel like, okay, well, these feel like they belong there, you know. So I'm gonna pull that in a little bit, just like that. And again, you know, the more time you take on this step, the better it's gonna look. But with this mirroring over, I'm just trying to get a simple indication that this is a sort of rest side of this mesh over here. So doing a couple of strokes, going back in and smoothing that back down. Where I want it to indent, I can hold Alt and kind of carve back into the side there. And there we go. Eventually it's going to connect with the underside of those plates. So then we want to do the same thing to the bottom here, just to kind of indicate these are coming out with some cartilage, muscles, whatever this would be in here. So this is really fast to do. Really adds to, you know, the realism of how these would connect to the body. And it's a subtle detail. I mean, from a distance, you may not even notice it, but up close, it's definitely going to be something that if it's missing, you're going to go, okay, why does that feel off? Why do those arms not feel like they should be on this body? And it's because the connections, the small areas don't feel like they read. So that's what we're doing now, is making sure that reads. Okay, so I can throw these areas back in here. And of course, we'll spend more time tweaking these later, but for now, now here, we'd want to sort of connect that in. So might have channels coming in from the sides that draw in like this, where these concave areas are going all the way through the underside of the mesh here. I don't know if we have like a snake-like ridge sort of thing happening. That might be a possibility for that. Of course, you'd want to maybe turn on lazy mouse and be a little bit more exacting in the way that you connect those up, but something like that. And of course, these are getting a little bit closer together all the way back. So we'll pull our draw size up a little bit, turn our Z intensity down, and do that on the smooth. And then I'll go through and I'll just really, really gently smooth back some of those edges. So you can see really this disgusting kind of sinewy thing going on here. And we talked about this being like really kind of translucent and disgusting. Who knows what's going on inside of here. But yeah, all those are little design decisions that we can reinforce as we decide how to build this out. So now I'm going back with the Damien standard and really carving in these details. This makes it feel a lot more like a, like a centipede or something gross like that. So Lauren's saying, how about the horn scales on the back of the dragon wrap around the belly to conceal the legs where they are folded up? Yeah, it'd be fun to take some of these and put another horn coming down or something, kind of like this, and wrapping in between there, like you said. That'd be interesting. So yeah, I don't really know what I'm going to do with this yet, but that is one solution to what we could do here. Okay, so kind of ugly right now, but we can go back and fix that up at some point. All right, guys, over time, I hope you guys have enjoyed watching me work on this dragon. It's not finished yet. I've got quite a bit left to do to get this up to a level where I would want to do a final render. I've shown you all of the major parts in the last 4 live streams. You got about 8 hours at this point of watching me put this thing together. And of course, you guys don't have to take that much time when you work on your own stuff. You can go faster than me. But I wanted to kind of show you what I would do to get a concept in here, pretty quick and pretty high res. So I'm going to keep working this behind the scenes. And before we get out of here, I've got some announcements I want to kind of share with you guys. So I'm going to turn this back over to my screen here. Okay, so tonight is kind of a special night. It is the 40th live stream that I've done on this channel, and it is kind of a milestone for me. So I wanted to announce there is some big changes going on right now with the business and things that are happening with the Orange Guild. And so because of that, I'm going to be transitioning this channel a little bit, and things are going to be switching up. So in the past, I was doing a live stream 3 times a week on this channel, and then I was taking that back for the past couple of weeks. I've been doing it only on Fridays. And I'm at a point now where I really just want to devote more and more time to the Orange Guild as much as I possibly can. And if you guys aren't aware what that is, it's basically my online training academy for Blender artists. So if you're into Blender, you want to do that, you want to learn that, or you want to be any sort of Blender artist, the Orange Guild is all about mentoring you, getting you to a point where you're a better artist, leveling up your skills, things like that. Lauren in the chat tonight is one of the first students that I've had in the guild, going all the way back to the beginning. She's been great, and really, really honored to have the people be a part of that. So I want to devote as much time as I can to them so that they get what they're paying for, and obviously they're going to be able to level up their skills. And I want to invite all of you to do that. There's free ways to get involved with the guilds. If you want to become a member, it's only $10 a month right now. That may be going up in the future depending on what we end up adding. But for right now, it's only $10, and it's not a lot considering what we're going to be adding towards the end of this year. New courses coming out and things like that's happening quickly. So I want to invite all of you guys to come to the new channel that I've been working on. So let me pull that up and kind of show you what that looks like over here. If you go to YouTube, where I assume most of you are at right now, you can search the Orange Guild. And let me move my screen back over here real fast. So it should pop up. This is the logo for the Orange Guild. Just started this up, and there's not anything on it yet. But as you can see, I'm transitioning the live streams over to this channel. So Friday nights, 7 to 9 p.m. Central Time, I'm going to be here doing Blender streaming. So if you've enjoyed the other stuff, the Substance stuff, the ZBrush stuff, I may trickle that in from time to time, but most of the stuff here, 90% or more, is going to be Blender. because that's what the business is about. So I'm doing this for people. So if they want to hang out, they want to just kind of get a feel for what things are about with the guilds, then come to this channel. And I'm going to be uploading weekly videos. So we'll be live streaming on Fridays, but I'll also try to be uploading tutorials and things throughout the week. Maybe not every week, but I'm going to be trying to do that every week and get this going for you guys. So yeah, check this out. Please subscribe if you haven't already. And this is where I'm going to be spending the majority of my time from now on, which is on this channel. So I will definitely send you guys an email when I start doing the live streams again. I know in the past I was sending the Orange Guild emails about the live streams, but then they got a little bit more non-Blender, so I didn't want to do that all the time. But these will definitely be Blender specific. So I was kind of hoping that 2.8 would be out by now and we could get jumped into the new stuff, but because of some setbacks, we're going to have to wait till next year to get into 2.8 with a final version. So we're going to be still spending time in the current version of Blender, which is still good for everybody that's still learning it, and we'll be doing videos over here. So really hope you guys have enjoyed the streams. I'm not saying this is the end of this channel, but I will definitely not be as active over here, and I'll be putting most of my attention into this channel here in the future. So please definitely head over there and subscribe, hit the little notification bell, and you know, we've got other things here. I'm on Facebook, I'm on Pinterest, I'm on Instagram. A lot of ways to get to us. If you haven't checked out the Orange Guild, then go to theorangeguild.com and you can see what we're all about here. So this is a little blurb about me and what I've been doing. I'm a certified trainer for Blender. So one of only 50 people in the world that is a certified trainer, if you are into that sort of thing. And then you can head over to the blog, read a little bit about what we've been doing up until this point. Still working frantically behind the scenes on getting some more things up for this website to make it look better. But then this is where you would go for training. And I've got courses already up. So most of the live stream hangouts for this channel are under the live stream hangouts here. So if you click on this and you enroll for free, you can check out all of those previous live streams. You can also go to these courses here if you enroll as a guild member, and you can check those out. So if you're interested in, you know, doing concept cars, things like that, you can buy the training individual if you want. For a one-time fee, you'll get permanent access, and then you can jump in and learn stuff as you want to go. Preview lectures here for how that looks in terms of playing around. And so if you want to preview a lecture, you can come in here and do it here. But that's basically what I do for a living. So if you guys want to support me, definitely head over to theorangeguild.com and consider becoming a member. Like I said, it is only $10 a month, so pretty cheap. And yeah, so thank you guys so much for tuning in tonight. I'll see you guys again soon, and have a great weekend.